the UN Secretary-General today took the unprecedented step of invoking Article 99 of the UN Charter, calling on the UN Security Council to avert a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. It comes after UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk described the situation as apocalyptic, with a heightened risk of atrocity crimes. Well, last time our next guest was on the show, she didn't accept there was a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. So I welcome back now Tzipi Hotovely, who is the Israel ambassador to the UK. And I'll ask, straight off the top, Ambassador, if I may, have you changed your mind? Do you now accept there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza?
There is no doubt there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, but Hamas needs to be blamed for that, because just today we saw Hamas taking over humanitarian aid trucks, taking food from the people of Gaza, taking over every single thing, including medicine. So this is Hamas behaviour that is preventing the people of Gaza to receive this humanitarian aid. So we still see Hamas as the main barrier to give the people of Gaza the humanitarian aid that Israel allows to get into Gaza.
But look, as you know, I support Israel's right to defend itself. I think Hamas, by what it did on October the 7th, showed that it has to be removed. And they live amongst the civilian population. It's an incredibly difficult war to prosecute if you're Israel. I accept all of those things. But the stark facts are that over 15,000 people have now been killed in Gaza already in just over 2 months, of which 4,000 to 5,000 are believed to be children. You cannot look at these scenes in Gaza and not feel the same way that we all do, that this is an extraordinary slaughter of innocent people as you go after terrorists.
Piers, I totally doesn't accept what you're describing at the moment, because think about how much efforts Israel is doing to make sure the Palestinians will get to designated areas in the southwest area of Gaza in order to have safer places, shelters, humanitarian aid, all these things Israel is doing, something that not in the past other countries did for enemy population. Now, we are dealing with a terror organization that as a strategy use the people and the children and the women as human shields. So they're basing all the bases, all their military bases inside hospitals. They're basing it into UNRWA schools. They're basing it into mosques. And as you know, now we are in Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis is the city that Yahya Sinwar, this archaic terrorist, that planned in this calculated way this devil plan of October 7th. So we now must finish the job of making sure Hamas won't control the Gaza Strip. There is no other way if you want a better future for Palestinian children as well as Israeli children.
But where are all these Gazans going to live when this is over? You've pretty well leveled the north of Gaza. You're now going into the south to do the same there. You're shoehorning these several million people into a tiny area where the facilities for them are truly awful, as every independent assessor is saying. But what happens after this? I mean, if most of Gaza gets destroyed and tens of thousands of Gazans are killed, what life is there left for them after this?
Well, that's a very good question. You're actually referring to the day after the war. So first of all, there is still a big task to Israel to make sure the underground tunnel city is destroyed. And as I'm carrying this to remind everyone, there are over 138 innocent people kept hostage in Hamas hands, including 15 women. And by the way, it was Matthew Miller, the spokesperson of the State Department, that said the reason Hamas didn't release them in the last pause is because they're very much terrified from the idea these women will speak up for all the atrocities, the rape, the systematic rape Hamas committed against innocent women. And I really appreciate the fact you spoke up for this sexual violence. But I want to tell you, I feel sometimes like Jewish women doesn't count. When you think about the world silence, when you think about UN organizations saying nothing about this systematic rape, Hamas mutilized women. There was a necrophilia. There was innocent young women from a music festival that had a gang rape. So those kind of things, we must make sure the world won't be silenced about. And I really think that this was one of those moments of silence that was a disgrace to the UN organizations and for many women organizations by not speaking up for that. So I want to remind you that because Hamas didn't release our hostages.
Well, listen, On that, I completely agree with you. But it's how Israel is going about prosecuting the war on Hamas that is causing increasing concern. And it is unprecedented for the UN Secretary General to invoke Article 99 of the UN Charter. They've never done it before. And this is because what he believes is a genuine, right now, safety, security, and humanitarian threat, which needs the attention of the whole UN Security Council. This humanitarian aspect of what is going on in Gaza is now something that's requiring unprecedented United Nations intervention.
Well, obviously, this is not the case because many times in the past, there were many types of humanitarian crises in many places. Do you think Mosul didn't look like Gaza after the Americans' airstrikes? Do you think Tokyo, after American airstrikes, didn't look worse than Gaza? So over 100,000 Japanese got killed in the Second World War under American airstrikes. And the reason it was because the Japanese involvement in Pearl Harbor. So we need to remember who started this war. Hamas started this war, and this is not in our duty, by the way, in no way, not to protect our people. This is actually our duty to make sure Israeli children will be protected in the future, and no one in the international community, including our allies, the Americans, the British, the Germans, no one is thinking there is other way besides making sure Hamas infrastructure won't exist. The military machine must be destroyed. And you need to remember that. Hamas brought it on his own people. 16 years of Hamas regime since 2005, no Israeli control over the Gaza Strip, and they brought just poverty and bloodshed over the Palestinian people.
At the moment, Ambassador, we have Israel giving us their version of what they're doing in Gaza. And the only journalists outside of people actually in Gaza, nearly 60 of whom have been killed, which is horrific, the worst death toll on journalists in living memory. But the international journalists want to get in there, but they're only being allowed in if they're with the IDF and carefully controlled. Why won't you let journalists go into Gaza and investigate this as they would in other war zones?
First of all, I'm sure journalists will be allowed into the Gaza Strip. At the moment, remember that many parts of Gaza are still controlled by Hamas, and Hamas is preventing from journalists to get in. And this is why IDF is actually giving access to journalists to get in and to see with their own eyes, to be eyewitnesses.
But only with the IDF.
And again, this is part of the reason why we want to protect them. We don't want them to get caught in a crossfire. But if we'll go back to your question...
Yeah, but the argument is, Ambassador, just to pick you up on that, as you know, what you may be protecting, as far as they're concerned, is access to reality. And, again, I'll just ask you, is it not time to allow foreign journalists to go in there without being escorted everywhere by the IDF, where clearly there's a conflict of interest there about what they may or may not be prepared to show?
Believe me, there is something that Israel doesn't have anything to hide. What we do is a self-protection of our people after the brutal attack at 7th of October. But if we'll go back to your question about the day after, one thing we realized after ongoing military operations, and this time we want it to be final, we don't want it to be ongoing violence cycles, in order to make sure both Israelis and Palestinians will have a better future. There is no doubt the Gaza Strip must be, first of all, demilitarized, and the second thing is it must be de-radicalized. When you think about the education system, under the UN symbol that brought these young Palestinians to grow up to be these monstrous terrorists, we need to stop that. We need to make sure the next generation will receive education of respecting the other side, just like Israelis are raised an idea that in the other side they are humans. They must stop dehumanizing Jews. And I want to tell you something. I thought anti-Semitism is out of this world. When I saw in 2023 the presidents of US, Ivy League universities still don't understand.
Well, I'm going to come to that.
The scale of anti-Semitism.
I'm going to come to that with my. I'm coming to that specifically with my next guest, actually. That's why I'm going to cut you off on that, Ambassador. Listen, I appreciate you coming back on the show. Yes. I think we should have a regular dialogue through this war. Like I said to you, you don't have to, justify October the 7th and Israel's right to defend itself after that. It's how you're doing it that is the matter of concern now. And I appreciate you coming on and answering some questions. Thank you very much.